Sophie was only 22, but life had aged her far beyond her years. Working double shifts at a small downtown diner, she barely made enough to pay rent and send a little home to her sick mother. Winter had arrived in full force, with icy winds cutting through the city streets, but Sophie couldn't afford a proper coat. Still, she showed up every day, wearing her worn-out jacket and an undying spirit. One afternoon, during her short break, she stepped outside to catch a breath of cold air and finally eat her only meal for the day, a simple tuna sandwich she had been saving since morning. As she leaned against the diner wall and unwrapped it, her hands trembling from the cold and exhaustion, something caught her eye. Just a few feet away, curled up on the sidewalk near the entrance, sat a little girl. Her clothes were thin, her cheeks red from the cold, and her big brown eyes were fixed not on the passers-by, but on the sandwich in Sophie's hands. Sophie hesitated for a moment. Her stomach growled, and she hadn't eaten since the night before. But as she looked at the girl's pale, hungry face, something in her heart stirred. Without thinking twice, she walked over, knelt beside the child, and extended the sandwich with a gentle smile. "You need it more than I do," she said softly, trying to hide the ache in her own stomach. The little girl looked up at her in surprise, then slowly reached out with cold fingers to take the sandwich. No words were spoken, none were needed. Her eyes said it all: gratitude, relief, and a flicker of hope. Sophie gave her a reassuring nod and stood up, brushing the snow off her knees, before walking back inside the diner. She didn't know that someone had seen the entire exchange from across the street. She didn't know that the little girl wasn't alone. And she certainly didn't know that this small act of selflessness, done without expectation or recognition, was about to change her life forever. But in that moment, all Sophie knew was that kindness mattered, especially when you had the least to give. From the warmth of a sleek black car parked discreetly across the street, Richard Blake watched the world move by through tinted windows. The city never stopped, its noise, its chaos, its indifference. As one of the wealthiest men in town, Richard was used to operating in a world far removed from the ordinary. Today, however, the ordinary had caught him off guard. Just moments earlier, he had been on an urgent business call, his attention consumed by numbers and negotiations. That brief lapse in focus had been enough for his daughter, Emma, to quietly slip away and wander toward the diner across the street. When he looked up and noticed her missing, panic surged through him. But before he could even throw open the door, he saw her, sitting quietly on the cold sidewalk, watching a young waitress with a sandwich in her hands. Richard froze, hand on the door handle, as he watched what happened next. The girl, Sophie, though he didn't yet know her name, noticed Emma and, without hesitation, walked over and knelt beside her. She didn't know who Emma was. She didn't know anyone was watching. She only saw a hungry child and chose to give up the only food she had. No hesitation. No pity. Just genuine, quiet compassion. Richard's heart, long buried under boardrooms and business deals, tightened in a way it hadn't in years. He stepped out of the car, walking swiftly across the street. By the time he reached Emma and scooped her into his arms, the waitress was already heading back inside, unaware she had just left an impression deeper than any business success ever had on him. He stood there for a moment, holding his daughter close, eyes still fixed on the diner's entrance. The woman hadn't waited for thanks, hadn't tried to impress anyone, she had simply acted out of instinctive humanity. And Richard Blake knew, right then and there, that this stranger had done more than feed his child. She had awakened something in him. Something real. Something powerful. Something he couldn't ignore. The dinner rush had finally faded, leaving only the soft hum of the dishwasher and the clinking of cutlery being stacked away. Sophie, drained from hours on her feet, moved quietly through the nearly empty diner, wiping down the last few tables with slow, tired strokes. Her feet ached, and her mind wandered to the next day, another shift, another handful of tips that might barely cover rent. Just as she reached for the mop, the diner's owner peeked out from the kitchen, a curious look on his face. "Sophie," he said, slightly breathless, "there's someone here asking for you, says it's urgent." Sophie's heart skipped. Urgent? Was it about her mom? Had something gone wrong? She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried toward the entrance. There, standing just inside the doorway, was a man she didn't recognize at first, tall, well-groomed, wearing a plain gray sweater and jeans. No coat, no entourage, nothing that screamed wealth or power. But there was something unmistakably composed about him. Something quiet but commanding. He stepped forward, a kind smile softening his features. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he began. "I wanted to thank you, properly." Sophie blinked, confused. "For what?" "For your kindness," he said, eyes gentle. "The little girl outside the diner earlier, she's my daughter." A flicker of surprise crossed Sophie's face. "I didn't know." "Exactly," he interrupted, with a smile. "You didn't know who she was. But you still gave her the only food you had. That tells me more about your heart than any resume ever could." Sophie was speechless. She wasn't used to being acknowledged, let alone by someone like this. "My name is Richard Blake," he continued. "I've spent years building companies, but now I want to build something that actually matters. I'm starting a foundation for underprivileged children. And I need someone to help lead it. Someone genuine. Someone with heart." He paused, eyes locking with hers. "I think that someone might be you." The hum of the diner faded into silence. For the first time in a long while, Sophie wasn't thinking about rent or shifts. She was thinking about purpose. And possibility. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the newly renovated community center, casting a golden glow on freshly painted walls and colorful murals drawn by the children who now called this place a second home. Laughter echoed from one of the playrooms, where volunteers played games and handed out snacks to wide-eyed kids full of energy and curiosity. Sophie walked down the hallway with purpose, clipboard in hand, but her steps held a softness that hadn't been there months ago. No longer in a waitress's apron, she now wore a navy blue jacket embroidered with the foundation's name and her new title, Director of Operations. Every corner of the building told a story, of hardship, healing, and hope. Sophie had helped design the daily meal plans, set up counseling rooms, organize classes, and train volunteers. But more than that, she had become a symbol of what the entire center stood for: compassion in action. As she stepped into her modest office, she paused for a moment, smiling at the controlled chaos outside her door, kids running, music playing, life being lived. On her desk, amidst files and sticky notes, sat a small framed photo. It was her and the little girl, Emma, taken just weeks earlier. Emma wore a bright pink sweater and held a sandwich in one hand, laughing mid-bite. Sophie had her arm around her, grinning just as wide. The photo reminded her of where it all began: one sandwich. One moment. One choice to give instead of keep. Sophie sat down at her desk and took a deep breath. The struggle wasn't gone, there were still long days and tough decisions, but for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She looked around the room filled with plans for outreach programs and partnerships, then back at the photo. "Thank you," she whispered, maybe to Emma, maybe to fate, maybe to the part of herself that never gave up. From waitress to leader, Sophie hadn't just found a new life, she'd found her calling. The chill of winter had long melted into the gentle warmth of spring. The sidewalk outside the diner, once gray and cold, now basked in sunlight, with cherry blossoms drifting lazily through the air. The same street, the same city, but everything felt different now. Sophie stepped outside, no longer weary and burdened, but calm and centered. She held two neatly wrapped sandwiches in her hands. One for herself. One for someone else. Her eyes quickly spotted him. A young boy sitting by the curb, knees pulled to his chest, eyes downcast. His clothes were dusty, his shoes too small. Without hesitation, Sophie walked over and crouched down beside him, just like she had months ago. She offered the sandwich with that same quiet, sincere smile. "You need it more than I do." The boy looked up, startled by the kindness, then slowly reached out and took the food with trembling hands. Sophie gave his shoulder a gentle pat and stood up, her heart full, not of pride, but of peace. Just a few steps behind, Richard stood with Emma by his side. The once shy little girl now beamed with joy, holding tightly to her father's hand. She watched Sophie with wide, admiring eyes, then giggled as a breeze lifted her curls. Richard watched the scene unfold, a deep sense of gratitude etched into his face. "She's teaching the world," he said softly, mostly to himself, one sandwich at a time. As Sophie turned back toward them, Emma ran forward and hugged her around the waist. The three of them stood there in the golden light, 3 lives changed by a single act of kindness, now forever intertwined. In a world often too busy to notice the quiet moments, Sophie had reminded them all that sometimes, the smallest gestures echo the loudest.